Yellowstone National Park welcomed 4.5 million visitors in 2023. That's almost 8 times the entire population of Wyoming. Every summer, millions of people drive through the state, snap photos of geysers and bison, spend money in gift shops, and then leave. They don't stay. They don't move there. They visit one of America's most iconic landscapes and then go home to literally anywhere else. Wyoming has 580,000 people spread across 97,000 square miles. That's roughly the land area of the United Kingdom, which has 67 million people. If Wyoming had the population density of Colorado, its neighbor to the south, it would have 5 million residents. If it matched Montana's density, it would still have over 1 million. Instead, it has fewer people than Milwaukee. This isn't Alaska, where emptiness is geographic destiny and people choose isolation. This is Wyoming, with 2 interstates, decent airports, stunning scenery, and no state income tax. On paper, it should be growing. Remote work should have triggered a stampede. The pandemic should have sent people fleeing expensive cities for cheap land and mountain views. That didn't happen. Wyoming's population grew by just 2.3% between 2010 and 2020, the 3rd slowest rate in the nation. Some counties actually lost population. Picture this. You're standing in downtown Casper on a Tuesday afternoon. The streets are clean. The mountains are visible in every direction. Victorian buildings line the main drag, and you count 5 people in 4 blocks. Not 5 groups, 5 people. This is Wyoming's 2nd largest city, and it feels like a movie set waiting for extras to show up. So what's really going on? Why is America's emptiest state getting emptier? The answer isn't what you think. It's not the cold. It's not the remoteness. It's not even the lack of a Trader Joe's, though that doesn't help. The real reason Wyoming stays empty is a perfect storm of geography, economics, and policy that creates a trap no amount of scenery can fix. And it's getting worse. Let's figure out why no one lives in Wyoming and why that's unlikely to change. The obvious answers that aren't the real answer. Ask someone why Wyoming is empty, and you'll get the same answers every time. It's too cold. It's too remote. There's nothing to do. These explanations sound reasonable until you compare Wyoming to places that actually are colder, more remote, and have even less to do, but somehow manage to attract and keep people. Montana is colder than Wyoming. Missoula averages 23 degrees Fahrenheit in January compared to Cheyenne's 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Montana gets more snow, has harsher winters, and sits farther north. Yet Montana has nearly twice Wyoming's population and grew 9.6% between 2010 and 2020, more than 4 times Wyoming's growth rate. Bozeman, Montana's fastest growing city, added 28% more people in that same decade. Cold isn't the problem. Alaska is the actual definition of remote. It's separated from the continental US by Canada, has limited road access, and costs a fortune to ship anything. Alaska has 733,000 people, more than Wyoming, despite being genuinely isolated in ways Wyoming isn't. Anchorage alone has more residents than Wyoming's 3 largest cities combined. Alaska proves that remoteness, by itself, doesn't doom a state to emptiness. The Dakotas are rural, agricultural, and have brutal winters. North Dakota has 779,000 people. South Dakota has 909,000. Both states are growing faster than Wyoming despite having similar landscapes, similar climates, and similar economic bases built on extraction and agriculture. If rural plains states can grow, why can't Wyoming? The "there's nothing to do" argument falls apart when you remember Wyoming has Yellowstone, Grand Teton, world-class skiing, hiking, fishing, and outdoor recreation that people pay thousands of dollars to experience for a week. The amenities exist, people just don't stay for them. Jackson Hole has some of the most expensive real estate in America. $3 million gets you a condo with a view, but Teton County's year-round population is only 23,000. Wyoming's most desirable town is so desirable that almost no one can afford to actually live there. That's not a success story. That's a microcosm of everything wrong with the state. So if it's not the cold, not the remoteness, and not the lack of things to do, what is it? The real answer is more complicated and more structural than any single factor. Wyoming isn't empty because of weather or geography alone. It's empty because its economy, its tax structure, and its policies have created a system where growth is nearly impossible, and the few people who do live there are increasingly stuck in a state that can't support them. The emptiness isn't an accident. It's a feature of how Wyoming works and how it's been designed to work for over a century. The geography trap, Wyoming sits at an average elevation of 6,700 feet, the highest mean elevation of any US state. That altitude creates conditions that go far beyond "it's a little chilly." The growing season in most most of Wyoming is 60 to 90 days. In Cheyenne, the last frost can hit in early June, and the first frost arrives in mid-September. You get 3 months, maybe 4 if you're lucky, to grow anything. Compare that to Nebraska, just to the east, where the growing season stretches to 150 days or more. Geography carved Wyoming into a state where agriculture, the economic foundation of rural America, barely functions. The wind is relentless. Wyoming's average wind speed hovers between 12 and 15 miles per hour sustained, with gusts regularly hitting 40 to 60 miles per hour. Cheyenne and Laramie sit in wind corridors that never stop. Rawlins, Casper, and Rock Springs face the same conditions. That wind doesn't just make winters miserable. It dries out the soil, accelerates evaporation, and makes water management a constant crisis. Wyoming receives an average of 14 inches of precipitation per year, most of it snow that melts too fast or blows away before it soaks in. The state is classified as semi-arid to arid across most of its territory. You can't farm without water, and Wyoming doesn't have enough. Picture this: February in Cheyenne. You step outside at 7 a.m. to scrape your windshield. The thermometer reads 15 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind is gusting at 45 miles per hour, driving the wind chill to -10. The sun is out, the sky is blue, and you can't stand upright without bracing yourself. That wind doesn't stop. It's been blowing since November. It won't quit until May. And when it finally calms down, you get 3 months before it starts again. A local city planner told us off the record, "We've had 150 years to figure out how to grow Cheyenne. The wind has had 150 years to remind us why we can't." Cheyenne is the state capital and the largest city, with just under 65,000 people. It sits at 6,062 feet, gets 16 inches of precipitation annually, and endures wind that routinely shuts down Interstate 80. It's been the capital since 1869, has had over 150 years to grow, and still can't break 65,000 residents. For comparison, Boise, Idaho's capital, has 240,000 people. Helena, Montana's capital, has 32,000, but sits in a state with nearly double Wyoming's total population. Cheyenne has every advantage a state capital should have: government jobs, infrastructure, visibility, and it still can't grow. That's not a policy failure. That's geography putting a ceiling on what's possible. The elevation and aridity limit what you can build. Water infrastructure costs more because you're fighting distance, topography, and scarcity all at once. Heating costs are brutal. Construction seasons are short. The wind tears up roads and buildings faster than they can be maintained. These aren't small inconveniences. They're structural barriers that make everything more expensive and less sustainable. Wyoming's geography didn't just make settlement hard. It made sustained growth nearly impossible. The state was never going to be a farming powerhouse, never going to support dense populations, and never going to compete with lower elevation, better watered neighbors. The trap was set before anyone built a town, and once the towns were built, they discovered that geography was only the beginning of the problem. The economic monoculture. Wyoming's economy runs on extraction: coal, oil, natural gas, trona, uranium. If you can pull it out of the ground and sell it, Wyoming built its budget around it. In the 1980s, energy-related revenue accounted for over 60% of the state's income. Even now, after decades of decline, mineral extraction still provides around 40% of state revenue. That dependence defines everything about how Wyoming works and why it can't grow. Gillette is the perfect case study. The town sits in the Powder River Basin, one of the most productive coal regions in U.S. history. At its peak in 2008, Wyoming produced 468 million tons of coal, nearly 40% of the nation's total. Gillette boomed. The population hit 33,000. Median household income soared past $80,000, well above the national average. The tax base exploded. Everything looked sustainable. Then the coal market collapsed. Natural gas undercut coal prices, environmental regulations tightened, renewable energy became competitive. Wyoming's coal production dropped to 218 million tons by 2022, less than half its peak. Mines closed, jobs disappeared. Gillette's population has been flat or declining since 2010. The median home price, once pushing $250,000, fell to $180,000. The city's budget, built on the assumption of perpetual energy revenue, couldn't adapt. Services got cut, infrastructure deteriorated, young people left. Picture Gillette today, noon on a weekday. Main Street has empty storefronts with faded for lease signs in the windows. The Walmart parking lot is half full. You can hear the wind and the distant sound of a coal train, but it's carrying half the cars it used to. The median home price dropped $70,000 in a decade, which sounds great until you realize it means no one wants to move here. A former coal miner told us, bus. I made $85,000 a year operating heavy equipment. Now I make $35,000 driving a truck in Casper. My son moved to Denver. He's not coming back. The boom-bust cycle isn't new to Wyoming. It's the entire economic model. Oil booms in the 1970s brought workers to Casper and Rock Springs. When oil prices crashed in the 1980s, both cities lost population and took decades to recover. Natural gas extraction surged in the 2000s, creating temporary windfalls in Sublette County. When prices dropped, the tax base evaporated. Trona mining around Green River keeps that town alive, but Trona demand is tied to global soda ash markets that Wyoming doesn't control. Every sector follows the same pattern. Boom, overinvestment, bust, abandonment. This cycle makes diversification impossible. When energy is booming, no one invests in alternatives because extraction pays better than anything else. When energy crashes, there's no money to invest in new industries. The state lurches from crisis to recovery to the next crisis, never building the foundation for a stable, diversified economy. Remote work was supposed to change this. The pandemic sent workers fleeing expensive cities for cheap land and mountain views. Wyoming checked every box: low cost of living, no income tax, outdoor recreation, space. Jackson attracted some wealthy remote workers, but Jackson is an outlier with California real estate prices. The rest of the state saw minimal growth. Why? Infrastructure. Broadband in rural Wyoming is spotty at best, non-existent in many areas. The workforce isn't there. Wyoming has the smallest labor pool in the nation, and the talent pipeline doesn't exist because the schools can't compete and the young people leave. Tech companies aren't coming to Wyoming. Manufacturing isn't coming to Wyoming. The diversified economy that every state development board promises hasn't materialized in 40 years of trying and won't materialize in the next 40 unless something fundamental changes. Wyoming remains dependent on extraction, and extraction is dying. That's not speculation. Coal employment in Wyoming dropped from 7,000 workers in 2012 to under 4,000 in 2023. The jobs aren't coming back. The revenue isn't coming back. And the people who built their lives around that economy are stuck. The policy paradox: Wyoming has no state income tax. That sounds like a competitive advantage. No income tax means workers keep more of their paychecks, businesses face lower costs, and the state markets itself as a tax haven for remote workers and retirees. In practice, it's a trap that starves the state of the revenue it needs to build the infrastructure and services that actually attract people. Casper is Wyoming's second largest city with around 58,000 people. It has an airport, a college, hospitals, and sits along Interstate 25. By every measure, it should be a regional hub. Instead, it struggles to fund basic services. The school district faces chronic budget shortfalls. Infrastructure projects get delayed or canceled because the money isn't there. The city can't compete with Colorado's Front Range cities for talent because it can't offer competitive amenities, schools, or quality of life. And the reason it can't is because Wyoming's tax structure doesn't generate the revenue needed to support a city of that size. Casper can't compete with Fort Collins for teachers, can't compete with Denver for young professionals, and can't compete with Cheyenne for state funding. It's Wyoming's second largest city, which is like being the second tallest building in a town with no skyscrapers. The state relies on mineral extraction taxes to fund everything. When coal, oil, and gas revenues were high, this worked. The state could build roads, fund schools, and provide services without taxing residents directly, but extraction revenue is collapsing and there's no replacement. Sales taxes can't make up the difference. Wyoming doesn't have enough people or commerce to generate substantial sales tax revenue. Property taxes are limited. Federal transfers help, but they're not enough. The state's budget has been in crisis mode for years, and every legislative session involves cutting services, raiding rainy day funds, or hoping energy prices bounce back. This creates a doom loop. Without adequate funding, schools deteriorate. Wyoming ranks near the bottom nationally in teacher pay, around $58,000 annually compared to over $85,000 in New York or $95,000 in California. The state loses teachers to neighboring Colorado, where pay is higher and districts are better funded. A Casper teacher we spoke with was blunt: "I love this state. I can't afford to stay in it. Colorado will pay me $20,000 more to teach the same kids in a better funded school." The math isn't complicated. Families with school-age children look at Wyoming's education system and choose to live elsewhere. Without families, the workforce shrinks. Without a workforce, businesses don't don't expand or relocate to Wyoming. Without businesses, the tax base stays weak. Without a tax base, funding for schools and infrastructure stays low. The cycle repeats. Montana, Wyoming's neighbor to the north, has a state income tax. Montana uses that revenue to invest in infrastructure, education, and services that attract people. Missoula, Bozeman, and Kalispell have all grown faster than any Wyoming city in the past 20 years. Colorado has an income tax. The Front Range is booming. Even the Dakotas, with similar rural landscapes, fund their states through income and sales taxes that Wyoming refuses to implement. Wyoming's no income tax policy was supposed to be an advantage. It's become a structural liability that prevents the state from building the foundation needed for growth. The policy paradox is this: Wyoming markets itself as low tax and business friendly, but it can't attract the businesses or residents who would benefit from that because the state can't afford to build the amenities those businesses and residents need. The tax policy that's supposed to drive growth is the same policy that makes growth impossible. The cultural isolation. Laramie is a college town. The University of Wyoming enrolls around 11,000 students, making it the intellectual and cultural center of the state. Laramie has coffee shops, breweries, a relatively progressive political climate by Wyoming standards, and a built-in population of young, educated people. It should be a pipeline for talent, a place where graduates stay and build careers. That's not what happens. Most students leave Wyoming after graduation. The brain drain is measurable and relentless. According to state workforce data, roughly 50% of University of Wyoming graduates leave the state within 5 years of finishing their degree. The reasons are consistent: no jobs in their field, low pay, limited career growth, and a social environment that feels suffocating after 4 years in a town of 32,000. One University of Wyoming graduate summed up the brain drain: "I spent 4 years in Laramie. I loved it, but there were 3 job openings in my field in the entire state, all in Cheyenne, all paying 60% of what I could make in Denver. The math isn't hard. Laramie can't keep its own graduates, and if a college town with a built-in talent pipeline can't retain people, the rest of the state has no chance." Wyoming's total population is 580,000 people, spread across a state the size of the UK. That's not enough people to create the networks, opportunities, and social infrastructure that keep young professionals engaged. In a state this small, everyone knows everyone within 2 or 3 degrees of separation. Job opportunities are limited and nepotistic. Dating pools are shallow. Cultural amenities are sparse. If you're under 40, ambitious, and want a career with upward mobility, Wyoming offers very little. The binary choice facing young people in Wyoming is stark: stay and accept limited opportunities, low pay, and social isolation, or leave and build a life somewhere with more options. Most choose to leave. The state's median age has been climbing for decades, currently sitting at 38.3 years compared to the national median of 38.5. That sounds close, but the trend is what matters. Wyoming's population is aging because young people leave and older residents stay. Retirees moving in for low taxes and open space can't replace the loss of working age professionals and families. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As young people leave, the state becomes older, more conservative, and more resistant to change. Businesses that depend on young workers struggle to hire. Cultural institutions lose audiences, schools lose enrollment. The lack of young people makes the state less attractive to other young people, which accelerates the exodus. The emptiness feeds itself. There's also the isolation factor that has nothing to do with age. Rock Springs sits in the southwest corner of Wyoming, roughly 180 miles from Salt Lake City and 110 miles from the nearest Wyoming city of any size. The town has 23,000 people, a Walmart, and not much else. Picture this: you're 28, living in Rock Springs. It's Friday night. Your options are the same bar you went to last Friday, the Applebee's off the interstate, or a 3-hour round trip to Salt Lake City to do literally anything else. Your dating pool consists of people you already know aren't compatible because you've known them since high school. This isn't charming small town life. It's isolation with a Walmart. If you live in Rock Springs and want to see a concert, visit a museum, or access specialized medical care, you're driving hours. That's true across most of Wyoming. Cheyenne is 100 miles from Denver. Casper is 240 miles from Billings. Laramie is isolated from everything except the interstate. The distances aren't just inconvenient, they're existential barriers to building the kind of connected, opportunity-rich life that people increasingly expect. Wyoming's cultural isolation isn't about rural versus urban preferences. Plenty of people choose small-town life and love it. The problem is that Wyoming's small towns are too small, too far apart, and losing the critical mass needed to sustain even basic culture cultural and economic functions. When your state capital has 65,000 people and your college town loses half its graduates, you're not building a future, you're managing decline. The verdict and future Wyoming isn't empty because of one factor. It's empty because of a system where geography, economics, and policy reinforce each other in ways that make growth nearly impossible. The geography sets a ceiling. High altitude, low water, short growing seasons, and relentless wind make agriculture marginal and infrastructure expensive. The economy built itself on extraction, which created boom-bust cycles that prevent diversification and leave the state dependent on dying industries. The tax policy designed to attract people starves the state of revenue needed to build schools, infrastructure, and services that actually attract people. And the cultural isolation drives out the young, educated workers who might otherwise stay and build something new. This isn't a temporary crisis, it's a structural condition that's been true for over a century and is getting worse. Coal isn't coming back. Oil and gas are volatile and declining. Renewable energy creates jobs, but not in Wyoming. Wind and solar farms employ far fewer workers than coal mines, and most of that employment is temporary construction work. The industries that built Wyoming's economy are dying, and there's no replacement on the horizon. The future scenarios for Wyoming are limited. The optimistic version is that the state becomes a resource colony, extracting what's left of its minerals, while the population continues to age and shrink. Wealthier retirees move in for the low taxes and open space. A few boutique towns like Jackson cater to the ultra-rich. The rest of the state becomes a museum of the American West, preserved in amber, visited by tourists, and inhabited by the people too old, too poor, or too stubborn to leave. Think of it as Yellowstone's gift shop stretching across an entire state. Beautiful to look at, expensive to maintain, and staffed by people counting down to retirement. The pessimistic version is that the tax base collapses entirely. Without mineral revenue, the state can't fund basic services. Schools close, infrastructure deteriorates, hospitals shut down, young families leave en masse. The population drops below 500,000, then 400,000. Towns that relied on coal or oil become true ghost towns, abandoned and unviable. The state government, built for a population that no longer exists, cuts services to the bone and survives on federal transfers. Wyoming becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when an economy is built on extraction and nothing else. There's no policy fix that solves this. Implementing a state income tax might stabilize the budget, but it won't bring back coal jobs or magically create a diversified economy. Investing in broadband and remote work infrastructure might attract some people, but not enough to offset the brain drain and aging population. The problems are too deep, too structural, and too intertwined to fix with incremental policy changes. Wyoming is empty by design. The geography made it hard to settle. The economy made it unstable. The tax policy made it impossible to invest in the future. And the isolation makes it unbearable for the people who might otherwise stay. 4 million people visit Yellowstone every year, marvel at the geysers, take their photos with Old Faithful in the background, and then leave. They've figured out what the numbers already show. Wyoming is a beautiful place to visit and a nearly impossible place to live. The state isn't getting less empty, it's getting more empty, older, and harder to sustain. That's the real reason Wyoming is America's emptiest state, and it's the reason it will stay that way.